Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the world. This is Dr. Nelson Ogunshakin, the Chief Executive of FIDIC. Welcome to the 18th webinar program. It's a real delight to be here today. Once again, it's been a long journey to get to where we are. Not too long ago, we had what is considered to be health care crisis. It moves into economic crisis. Now we are talking about social crisis. This webinar program has been looking at all sorts of issues as related with COVID. Now we're talking about a pandemic that changed the world. What lesson can we learn by the global infrastructure sector? I am delighted to welcome you to this particular webinar today, wherever you are around the world, and I hope you are keeping safe. A lot of life has lost, a lot of challenges has faced the world. Today we are getting together the best of the best over the 18 series that we've had, with the intention that we can have an opportunity to reflect on what has happened over the last 10, 12 weeks, and actually as an industry to have an opportunity to reflect on it and take it forward as to how do we move forward. I am delighted once again to have eminent speakers, and we've got speakers that we've chosen from the previous program. And again, today's program will be very, very similar to the previous one, but slightly different, where I will do the introduction. I will bring in our president to say a few words, and then there will be opportunity for the panel speaker. This time, rather than 10 minutes, I'm going to insist that we need to keep it to about 5 to 7 minutes, so we have real opportunity to engage our audience who are going to pose a lot of questions to us as to what lesson we've learned this year. And hopefully, once we finish the panel session, we should be able to go into Q&A session, and there will be a list of things to come. This is not the end yet. We're about to move into the second stage. And at this point, I'll be quite just to give you an overview of what we've gone through over the last 10 weeks. And if the next slide flow in, my real interest is just really to give some headline. We know we had what was called healthcare pandemic, and it's moved on into economic issue, and we're now looking into social. The figure is staggering. We've seen a lot of people dying all over the world. But at the same time, the level of infection has gone through from Africa to America to Eastern Mediterranean to Europe and Southeast Asia and Western Pacific. We are looking at a staggering figure, which is mind-blowing. Yet the world continues. Over the same period, we've traveled an extensive journey where we've looked at 18 webinars over 10 weeks. And over that period, we have 15,000 individuals who have registered to take part. We've actually had 9,000 attended the webinar over the last period. And we've produced 3 guidance notes, which has been well received in the industry. I'm so pleased that we make some progress over this period. A lot of people look at it as disaster, but we've taken it as an opportunity to reach out to the industry. I want to thank all those people who participated, from Adam all the way from Poland to Gavin English from UK, and there are other people who are speakers in the program, Gina London from Ireland to Nicola Grayson from Australia, and other people also who participated. Peter Tunnicliffe, president of CMD Smith, to Bill William, our board and president, who has been absolutely fantastic in supporting us. Guess what? He has not missed any of these 18 programs. I missed one, he has not. And I take my hat for him, because wherever he is, all the way, he gets up early in the morning to make sure he is the big guy with a big smile on his face, keeping the FIDIC staff enthusiastic about what is going. So I'm so pleased to make sure that our bill, is continually better. And I want to thank all the companies who's been involved with our program in the past, from Arab to KPMG to CDM Smith to USIC to Aon and ACEs all over the world for supporting. We had the World Bank supporting us. This has been absolutely brilliant, from our point of view, and all our association has been supportive. Move on to the next slide. Over the same period, we haven't been complacent. We've been really asking the audience, what do they think? And out of score of 5, we've got an average of 4.4, which is fantastic. We've had over 150 countries participating. In terms of the quality of speakers, we've had a rating of 4.6 out of 5. Wonderful, fun feedback. Not only have we done the particular program here, we've also put it on YouTube, and it's staggering to look at the figure. Force Majeure being the biggest one on the list, down all the way down, what does the new normal means? The figures are there and self-explanatory. Over 10,000 people have visited our YouTube and see the figure, and it's absolutely mind-blowing. I would suggest at this point, before we go forward, this is a challenge for all the MAs around the world to signpost what FIDIC has done to their members so that they can see the benefit. If they're unable to attend, they should be able to take the opportunity to view. Next slide. When we start looking at this, what are the key messages over the last program? We've had issue to do with force measure to look at how do we communicate. The message is quite clear. The question for us as an industry, where do we go next? How do we address this issue? And these are the themes coming through over the last 10 weeks. And on that note, I'm going to move to the next slide where we start looking at, can we get our Bill to give us an opening speech as we ever do? Bill, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson. And we have an awful lot of material to cover today, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. But first of all, I would like to congratulate and thank Nelson and his Secretariat staff for putting these webinars on together so successfully. This would be a challenge under any circumstances. It certainly is a major challenge under the conditions of a pandemic where so many people are working from home and doing a lot of other activities. So my thanks and congratulations to the Secretariat under Nelson's leadership for putting these together. I'd also like to thank our speakers for joining us today. We have a number of them. They're very busy people with their firms and with their families, etc. So I thank them very much for agreeing to spend some time with us during this webinar. And finally, I'd like to thank all the attendees. As Nelson mentioned, we've had a number of folks joining us for these webinars, which tell us that we're doing the right thing, and that's very, very important to us. This is the 18th webinar, and Nelson asked me to share a few thoughts. And in the context of knowing what other speakers are going to be mentioning, I came up with basically 3 things I'd like to mention briefly. And they really tie into what we've been hearing in the previous 17 webinars. First of all, the future, as we all know, is uncertain. But I think we all would agree that it is certain that things will be different in the future. And the 3 themes I'd like to mention in that regard are the new normal, that we all talk about the concept of a new normal. I believe from what we've heard in the webinars and what we're reading and learning from our firms is that working remotely with sophisticated tools is creating opportunities for the engineering profession to produce higher quality projects faster and at less cost. And I really believe that that will be one of the outcomes of this pandemic that's on a positive side, which will help us address infrastructure needs. We've also heard in the webinars the need for leadership, collaboration, and communication. We could talk at length about all of those subjects, but in summary, we all need to protect our people, of course. We need to look out for our clients' interests, all our stakeholders and partners and team members on our projects, and of course the companies. In that regard, we need to try to understand everyone's issues related to the pandemic and try to seek win-win solutions to the problems. And sometimes, frankly, the win-win might be the least desirable of a number of not very desirable options. The final thing I'd like to mention, and Nelson's going to pick up on this at the end of the webinars, is before the pandemic, the professional engineering community and construction community realized that we have not been spending enough money on infrastructure, and that's been going on for a really long time. That has not changed. If anything, the pandemic has caused additional needs in the infrastructure area. When these webinars are over, we at FIDIC want to start to re-energize our State of the World reports to address infrastructure needs and remind our stakeholders of the critical needs to deal with them. And they include the UN development goals, climate change, etc. And I know Nelson's going to end with that, so I won't say any more about it. There's a lot more I could say, but I want to end with thanking everyone for these webinars and turn it back to Nelson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. And I think the big thank you should go to you, Bill. I really take my hat off, for your consistency and the leadership you've provided over these last 10 weeks, where people can see this as a major disaster, a major challenge, but actually you've tasked us in FIDIC to rise to the challenge. We've risen to the challenge, and I hope we've been able to satisfy a member and stakeholder all over the world. At this point, I'm delighted to invite once again Anthony Barry, our Vice President from Australia. It should be his time to go to bed now, but he told me that he needs to do this, and then he's going to have a glass of wine before he goes to bed. So, Mr. Barry, I'm going to invite you. From corporate perspective, what lesson have we learned, and where should we be going forward? Tony, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nelson. I think I'd like to address a couple of things that have come out of the pandemic and the response. Particularly look at preparedness, leadership, the response that we've engaged in the last number of months, and how we might go forward. I think firstly to acknowledge the severity and of the transmission and the health impacts of COVID-19, and I would urge everybody to take stock and think about what it has meant to their company, to sit down and think through what they have done well. I'm sure there are many things people have done really well. Look at the things that caused additional stress on the organisation, and look at those things which really worked for people. I think it's a great chance to reflect as we move forward in the next number of months, and to take away a lot of learnings from this experience. The reality is, before 1st of January 2020, it was an almost unknown virus, and we had no testing for it of significance. We have no vaccine for it still, and it really has impacted the world in a very significant way. So you couldn't get a better example of a disaster to learn from in our time. As it turned out, our only option was to rely on social distancing to slow the spread of the virus. And then, of course, our national leaders had no choice, or little choice, but to shut down large parts of our economy. And the impact of that on our companies and on employment and on people's well-being has been very serious. But you're quite right, or Bill's quite right in what he said. We have adapted tremendously well in some parts of the world, in others maybe not so well. But if I go to preparedness, which I think is important, the first pandemic plans were drawn up many years ago, and after 2000, or the mid-2000s, we then got into some very serious pandemic planning with the threat of the earlier viruses that took place. Now, that preparedness in some cases was led at a national government level, but in many cases also translated into the work that firms did. And it's that preparedness, if you like, and the resilience of the infrastructure that was built around that preparedness and that planning, which has seen some countries work through this very well, and has seen some companies work through it very well. In some countries, that preparedness extended to include changes in regulation, changes in laws, to really give the medical profession the teeth, the legal teeth, to manage the crisis. In some companies, they developed individual governance structures which were designed to address a disaster circumstance such as a pandemic. Other countries invested heavily in communications and internet infrastructure to the point where it is absolutely viable for very large numbers of people to work from home. And that is certainly a signal to what our future might look like. The preparedness of the firms, in my mind, includes many things. And one of those, and one of the most important things, is to be able to maintain your liquidity or your cash flow through the crisis. And I think if everyone takes away a lesson from this, an excellent relationship with your banker, and a very healthy balance sheet is an important place to start. Obviously, effective governance and leadership are going to be very important, and I'll talk a little bit about leadership in a few more moments. But a culture which, in your companies, which is resilient and agile and innovative, also contributes tremendously to your success in circumstances like this. I think we've learned a lot about the need to support our clients and make sure that we are in there assisting them to navigate through the crisis themselves. Obviously, a strong revenue pipeline, the appropriate risk management plans, strong health and safety plans, all these things are great foundations for handling a crisis such as this. And obviously, having the collaboration platforms in your companies to assist people to be able to work from home, work remotely, are going to be vital to surviving these things. We should not assume for 1 minute that this is the last pandemic we're going to see. We should work forward with a very positive attitude that we may have to do this again in a number of years and want to succeed at doing it. So I can now move to leadership. I think if one looks at the governments of the world, before you get to the companies, you'll be able to see two things happening. You'll be able to see situations in which institutions failed to work or failed to cooperate in managing the pandemic. You'll see others that work very well. You'll also see leaders that recognize when the institutional response wasn't adequate and have worked to encourage collaboration, cooperation, and so forth to make sure that any cracks in the institutional fabric of a country were covered. The same applies in companies. Nothing will be perfect, and the leadership that our CEOs and their senior executive teams bring to the company in a time of crisis like this is absolutely vital to covering off the situation we have when the systems aren't going to respond perfectly, or when, as they are now, the situation is very uncertain and volatile. So I think it's really important to think about how your company responds in the future, and in bringing together the leadership team to address the event, it is the most appropriate leadership team for the event rather than the one that the company might operate within the business as usual environment. It's also very apparent that in the absence of these solid attributes around governance and leadership, poor political leadership and division have exacerbated the impact of the virus very considerably. And the same has occurred in some companies. We have had situations where the company has come under so much stress that the leadership has come apart, and in that circumstance, a very difficult situation to recover from. Our staff, of course, are vital to our success, and enabling our staff to function effectively and to provide them with the leadership and the confidence to do so is critical. So our leaders need to be able to sense and understand the situation. They need to be able to engage. They need to accept the uncertainty and the stress and the volatility that's going on. They need to empathize with it and support our people to get through. Our people have tremendous capability. Our systems have great capability, and in large measure, given the right encouragement and the right leadership, they will succeed. I think it's also important to recognize that effective situational leadership is what's needed in these circumstances. And nobody, I don't believe, has all the skills to be the sole leader of a company in these circumstances. However, being able to bring together the right team is going to ensure success. I've spoken before, and I won't go over it, but the board has a very important role to support the CEO and to oversee the company's situation through the crisis, not to interfere, not to manage or not to oversee the business by managing it too tightly, but to give the CEO every support and his team to get through the crisis effectively. I think, again, it's important that our executive team sit down and take out the lessons learned and make sure that they build those lessons learned into their future plans. I think to try and suggest that I know all of the things that have gone well or gone wrong would be totally inappropriate. But what I do think is there's a great opportunity now to build a new body of knowledge across the industry about how we deal with this sort of issue. And a few thoughts are there that I have is that firstly, through our MAs, we should continue to influence government and continue to encourage them to address gaps in our governance and our institutional response to the pandemic. It's very evident here in Australia, even though you could say that it's been handled very well and our numbers are very low and our unemployment's low. It's just got over 5%. You know, you could say that, you know, we've handled it well. Well, the truth is that there are still many cracks in our institutional framework that need to be strengthened going forward. So also in our companies, we need to make sure we've got the right leadership teams. We need to maintain our financial strength and our balance sheet, make sure we've got the cash flow to get through difficulties and the support from our bankers to do so. Our staff, I think, we need to show them tremendous appreciation for what has gone on in the last number of months and what will continue for some time yet. And certainly develop or continue to develop the culture which is resilient, agile and innovative. I think from a client point of view, I would hope that many companies have taken tremendous learnings out of this crisis about how they can better support their clients in the execution of projects and in advising them on their business needs. To me, this is a great opportunity for the future. And lastly, to not let this crisis pass without investing further in our preparedness and doing the planning that we need to facilitate the agility we require to get through these sort of crises. I think it is vital not to simply move into the new normal and assume it's all gone past us. We must learn from it and we must reflect on it. We must discuss it and make sure that we're more resilient going forward. To comment on one small matter, and that is the new normal. The estimates at the moment, certainly in this country, are that we are going to see 35% of people continue to work from home in their new roles. I don't think we know what the new normal is going to look like yet, but I do think there's a lot of room to open a broad discussion and, if you like, reimagine what the industry will look like in a year or two's time. I do encourage you all to continue to participate in that conversation, both with FIDIC and with your MAs and other firms in your countries. And I hope, I wish you well going forward for the rest of the economic crisis, which is still ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. I think the 3 points you raised is quite value, acknowledging the challenge, how prepared are we, and leadership. And on the basis of that, you've given us some food for thought, and I'll come back to that. But at the same time, I'm mindful of time. I'm going to invite Chituwa at this point to come back into it. You spoke before in one of our webinars. I'm delighted to invite you, Chituwa, to give us your perspective as the CEO of a member association with challenges that you face. What are the lessons learned from this particular COVID-19? How is that relevant to you as an organization, to you as an individual, and to your fellow MA worldwide? Thank you, Chituwa.
Thank you, Nelson. Thank you, and welcome to everybody listening and watching this very exciting webinar series. So my name is Chituwa Chulu, the Chief Executive Officer of the Association of Consulting Engineers of Zambia. So I remember on Wednesday, 18th March, 2020, the first 2 cases of the COVID-19 were recorded in Zambia. However, the effects of the pandemic were already being felt around the country as health traumas suddenly gripped our nation. COVID-19 and its effects have brought about challenges that could not have been anticipated by most of our firms, and in particular, any firm rather around the world. Social distancing and lockdowns have brought about the new normal. So this new normal has brought about extreme challenges. The association, for one, it has seen the revenue plummet with no income coming in by way of face-to-face trainings, which is the largest income earner for us here as an MA. I'd want to say most MAs, training is also a very large contributor to their income. So resources there have suddenly dwindled. Also, there has been a slowdown in infrastructure projects because lockdowns and social distancing have made it almost impossible for our members to carry out their works at various construction sites. These delays will undoubtedly make projects cost spiral out of control. So there is need to create relationships and partnerships with all the players in the industry, just in order to control these costs or manage these costs. The association, for one, now has to start offering courses, online courses, and think of innovative ways of increasing streams of income by diversifying its offering to its members and stakeholders. With the skills present here in Zambia and the strong collaborative efforts that we have seen, there has been a high rise in skills transfer. So again, it's imperative that capacity building is prioritized to ensure that more local engineering firms take up huge, challenging projects. So capacity building is definitely essential. Government liaison and relations, Anthony mentioned that. The coronavirus has made it more evident that consulting engineering plays a pivotal role in economic development. So it's a great opportunity for engineers to come to the fore and be more creative, be more innovative, and do what they do best, which is provide solutions. There's a clarion call to duty is made to rethink our priorities in infrastructure development in order to attend to the realities of the moment and beyond. Consulting engineers need to design solution-based infrastructure for our daily lives, incorporating this new normal. Firms now need to develop high levels of responsiveness to change and better deal with challenges as they arise. The industry also has to be aware that there are unknown unknowns. In as much as we cannot plan for unknown unknowns, quick responsiveness to crisis can save lives, resources, and can mitigate risks as they arise, and obviously increase the rate of recovery for our firms. So it's imperative that firms in the infrastructure industry become resilient, making them more effective, more efficient, and change ready. Firms need to be agile, and they need to be ready to change and adapt to change and deal with the threats that more often than not present themselves in a dynamic nature. The Zambian government and stakeholders, in collaboration with us, the MA, need to take deliberate quantum leaps to improve infrastructure in critical areas of the economy. The ICT sector, by increasing connectivity and making access to broadband more affordable and reliable. If we are going to be working remotely, if we're going to be working from home, these facilities need to be available and affordable. People should not have to turn off their data when they go to bed at night. In the future, what I'm terming IRR, which is industry ready responsiveness, should be the new norm, should be a norm. And what I mean by that is, in times of crisis, we should have a cross-pollination of efforts from various stakeholders to fight any calamity that may arise. This was witnessed where a car manufacturer, I believe, started making ventilators to help mitigate efforts for the COVID-19. So this is what I'm terming industry-ready responsiveness. With a possible global recession coming, it's going to hit developing nations like Zambia very hard, especially in the infrastructure industry. So it's very important that there's collaboration, as already mentioned, between the government and financial institutes. So as resources dwindle, the government needs to make deliberate policies to reduce the cost of doing business in Zambia, reduce interest rates for our members, offer tax breaks, as well as enable businesses to have access to funding. In the same way, the pandemic has had no respect for borders and boundaries. I believe the infrastructure industry should have an international response to tackle the long-term effects of the COVID-19 and put in place measures that in an event another pandemic occurs, the effects will not be as devastating. Myself and my members have greatly benefited from this series, as it has provided a great platform for cross-pollination of ideas, best practice, dissemination of information, highlighting challenges, and where possible, offering solutions faced in the industry from a global perspective. And our members have been able to benefit from this series. So as I reflect on lessons learned, in my opinion, I think the lessons learned are many and we're still learning. But the FIDIC has done a commendable job by highlighting strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that the COVID has brought about by taking us through a series of topics that are real and affect the industry, from MA's responses through to today's last series, which is lessons learned, and everything in between. Through this series, we have been able to communicate to our members, and as such, we've been able to bridge the gap between our firms and ourselves, and of course, and FIDIC. So this is why, as an association, I believe that we will continue to advocate for the use of the FIDIC forms of contract and the use of the guidelines as they take into consideration experiences from around the world and amalgamate them. And yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Chituwa, thank you very much. I think your points are so valid and so relevant, and I'm sure that looking at the impact in terms of Zambia and the impact on the association and your members and your recommendation in terms of government relationship, how the industry need to work together, not just now, but also industry readiness for the future, and the need for us to look at other, infrastructure such as ICT will go down very well. I think, those are good lessons to learn, and your pointer as to FIDIC, document and the validity of that, so really good. I'm now going to move very quickly into Vincent Liu. Vincent, I've been before, we touched twice, I think, in the previous, webinar, and now I just want you to give us your perspective. What lesson learned from the point of a FIDIC contract? A lot of questions come in the past. I do not expect you to answer the question. What are the key 5 points that we think we can learn from this particular pandemic? Vincent, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nelson, and hi to everyone. Yeah, the first point I would like to highlight out of this crisis is the FIDIC contract machinery that we have available in our various forms, whether works contract or services contract. I think it has proved to be well adapted to deal with the situations in many countries. We have seen a very wide diversity of situations depending on countries. In some countries, local authorities, governments have put works on hold and have actually suspended all the construction operations, at least for a certain while. I'm thinking of Switzerland and Geneva, for example. It has not lasted long, but it was still for 10 days or so. Other countries said, well, you can continue working on site provided you put in place the right health and safety measures, which is of course bringing constraints to the supply chain by providing for more costly measures and also generating some disruption and loss of productivity. And in other countries, the situation on construction job site has not been so much directly impacted, but sometimes supply chains were impacted, with example of countries affected by situations in neighboring countries, and making that the mobilization of goods from outside the country to the country was sometimes made difficult. Also, we noted that many people were very keen to jump on force majeure, exceptional event clauses in our contracts as to find a relief out of it. However, I think one of the lessons learned is that this is definitely not a duck walk. When you enter into a force majeure clause, people like me coming from a civil law background know how hard it can be to succeed in a force majeure case in court. And in fact, you have two main difficulties in our situation. You have to demonstrate that this situation prevented you from performing your obligations. Making them more onerous to perform is not enough. You have to demonstrate that you were prevented to deliver your obligations. And the second point is that once the event occurs, you have to demonstrate that you could not reasonably have overcome it or avoided it. And of course, one can argue that with the right health and safety measures in place, like face masks, sanitizers, social distances, then you can actually overcome the situation and continue working. So in fact, our contract have demonstrated that also our other provisions like change in law are very much relevant to the case and are actually probably in most of the cases the right entry point for people looking for relief and to deal with this situation with their other party. We have also other provisions about unforeseeable shortages in the supply chain caused by epidemic or government action. And that's also another useful provision that people can rely on. So we wrapped all this up in the guidance memorandum published in April, which was very much case-based. We tried to make it very practical for people so that they could identify in which of the different project situations that we highlighted they were, so as to provide the guidance to them. A second point I would like also to mention is that it has been also a useful reminder for everyone that contracts do not operate in a vacuum, and that of course one should resist the temptation to stay within the four corners of a contract. Contract management is a sister practice or daughter practice, I should say, of project management. And also one has to take into account the impact of the governing law, the impact of decisions from authorities, which are very much affecting your contractual rights and obligations. And also that for some, I'm thinking especially about employers, that you have to take into consideration your corporate and social responsibility in the sense that you may have a right to do certain things. You may have a right to impose delay damages to your contractor. You may have a right to suspend the works or whatever, but don't forget the impact on the supply chain this may have if everyone was acting the same. So I think a right is one thing, enforcing it and exercising your right is another thing. So we have seen actually many countries, and I'm thinking of France, for example, imposing some so-called legally protected period, where during this period in between March and June, for example, in France, you are not allowed to impose delay damages for delays suffered by your contractors, of course, provided that there is a clear link demonstrated with the COVID situation, and also to move on with termination. That's kind of things which are now impossible due to those legal provisions that we now have in France, and also in other countries. We have seen similar attempts with the creation of a legally breathing space period. Also in the UK, we noted the UK Cabinet Office moves in April, but more in the line of recommendations to employers, not necessarily then for them not necessarily to apply their right drastically. Turning to the future, I think we'll have, of course, to take into account the fact that those new health and safety measures will have a cost impact, and they will have also a time impact in terms of productivity. So that will be to be taken into account for current and future contracts. In terms of a second wave, if a second wave is coming up, and of course we hope it will not, but if it turns out to be the case down the line, of course, relying on change in law regime, change in law provisions, unforeseeable shortage of personnel and goods, or force majeure exceptional event clauses might be, of course, much more difficult now that the industry has developed some guidance of how to deal with the situation on the construction job site. I would hope that it will take people to engage into more collaborative contracting in their day-to-day dealings rather than adversarial contracting. But at the same time, although the situation should tend to take us to have an open-minded view to the dealing of contract situation. It should not be a naive one. We all know, of course, that some may take advantage of this situation to hide issues or difficulties which would have been there in the first place anyhow, but for COVID situation. So causation, as usual, will be critical so that you keep an objective view on things. Let's also be clear on the fact that there is a growing pipeline of claims and disputes coming in the way. I think our FIDIC contracts are well suitable to deal with that pipeline, in the sense that we have a very central role of the engineer who is there to make fair determinations regarding any claim situation that may come up, and also who is there to encourage that the parties reach an agreement as to a claim situation. And if that does not bear fruit, you have dispute boards in place which are there in particular for dispute avoidance. So you can go to them, seek their opinion, and also, if you want, to submit a dispute to them for their quick and efficient decision. In terms of the dealings between the parties, and also with the dispute board, the interesting point highlighted by this period is that it might not have been their revolution yet as such, although we are of course always keen to see with such a massive crisis a sign of revolution somewhere, but maybe we are more talking about an evolution rather than a revolution, an acceleration of trends regarding distant working and online meetings. For dispute boards, I have seen on dispute boards where I sit, more, of course, online dispute board meetings replacing site visits, and also online hearings replacing face-to-face hearings. I do not see this as the absolute and final way to deal with things in future. I think it will never replace fully face-to-face interaction. After all, we are human beings, and our social interaction do not work well with social distancing. When we are from a distance and behind our screens and computers, of course, we lack the feel of people and the direct interaction with people. But as an alternative, I think it's an interesting way forward, and something probably that will be a good lesson for the future. That means for our dispute board dealings, but also other dealings in between the parties, we may now be much more keen to have online sessions, online meetings, online hearings, rather than systematically thinking of going and traveling to meet the people. So this also may generate a positive cost impact and environmental impact as well, of course, because when people travel from many different countries to meet for 3 or 4 days hearing, that has, of course, a cost and an environmental impact. That's about it for what I had to say, Nelson.
Thank you very much, Vincent. I think, the way you've taken it, I'm really pleased that you wind the clock back into looking at, yes, the essence of the FIDIC contract, and you touch on the issue about, different approach in different countries, the force measure. You went on to about contract do not, work in vacuum. We need to understand there should be process in place, and talked about, the role of the project management and the governance and the, corporate social responsibility, distinction between rights and enforcement. And then the second wave, we wish we don't get it, but if we have it, there are issues we need to look at. Then the growing pipeline of claims and how do we deal with that, whether it's the DAB or the DAAB, an evolution rather than resolution. So I like that. There will be change. How do we move that forward in future? That's something that's absolutely imperative that we need to think about that. At this point, I'm going to invite Graham Pontin, who has been just of a think tank behind the scene, to look at it from the issue about policy, because I understand from Tony's point of view and from Chituwa really saying this is a golden opportunity for our MA to be at the table and to advise the government on what should be the economic growth strategy we need to look at. So Graham, without spending not more than 5 minutes, can you give us your take? What lesson can we learn from the point of economic and policy across the industry? Graham, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Nelson. I mean, I would say the first thing is these webinars have shown how we can interact with people on a far wider base than we probably anticipated before COVID. The important thing being that the issues that have been raised are part of this. It's FIDIC having its flexibility in policy response and development going forward so that we can address the issues that are out there for industry and bring people together to work together going forward. I know you're going to outline some more of that later, so I'll leave that there for the moment. If we look at how far we've come, COVID has, whilst had its significant effects, it has shown that in targeted areas, investment can be ramped up and delivered very quickly if needed. Having said that, it has also demonstrated that investment has fallen in other areas and it is not consistent across all sectors, industries or company. Effectively, the effect of it is that it does look like it's going to be slightly more prolonged than people were first hoping. And the flexibility I was talking about is going to be important in addressing some of the issues and lessons that we've learned from this, which I'll sort of outline now. The first is that FDI flows and investment between countries is down quite significantly. It is anticipated to be down around 30 to 40%, which, whilst it sounds a horrendous number, is actually not dissimilar to the last financial crisis, so it is not far worse. Companies are having some trouble servicing debts, and that's because the investor premium on bonds and stuff at the moment are effectively being overcompensated for default risk premium. Now, defaults will increase, that is likely, but what it does mean is that there is pricing already in the market for that, so hopefully we should see it improve. And then if we look at market resilience, the stock market and earnings and expected earnings and economic growth are quite correlated well together. And the fact that as companies and countries are slowly opening up, we've seen a return to some form of growth in this area is a good thing and suggests that whilst this may be a slightly prolonged exit, it might not be as bad as was initially anticipated. So if we look at some of the lessons that we've learned and some of the topics we may look to look at future, the last recession started a trend of looking at extracting future value to invest in infrastructure. Now, this is an interesting concept. It's used some in more in other countries than others. But if I give you an example, if you manage to extract the value of increasing the penetration rate on internet access for the developing world, so you got it up from 35 to 75%, that would equate a £2 trillion improvement in GDP. That is more or less the equivalent side of the package they think is anticipated to bring them out of COVID. So it provides a substantial opportunity to capture these future values and use them in policy development. In the last recession, we talked about shifting from income-based flows to more capital-based ways of running money because it provides more stability in times of crisis. So I think there's some work to be done out of this crisis that builds on the one from the last financial crisis. This will mean also looking at things like procurement and how government interacts with procurement. PFI in the UK has suffered, but it is still a popular mechanism around the world. And so how do we unlock the funds and finance to go into these, but how do we target PFI at the type of infrastructure that is now required? Because I think something else that will come out of this is the social aspect of investment. People are now going to place a lot more social capital in things like education and healthcare, even if it is only for the short to medium term. And so this will affect where investment goes. The other one that's interesting is that we've learned from these webinars that remote working is something, and the way we interact with people is going to change. Now, the OECD only this morning was saying that there needs to be a consistent approach towards digital taxation across the globe because there is the potential that digital barriers are being formed across borders. Now, that could cause problems for things like remote working in the future. If we're truly going to embrace such technology and increase its penetration, we need to ensure that an institutional environment is created where we can work together through people like FIDIC and the World Bank and the various UN and global organizations to ensure that these barriers don't take back progress that has been made as a result of this crisis. It is an opportunity, so we should use that. And that is the final point I think I would make, is that actually cooperating and doing things together going forward, but building up that institutional environment whereby they are long-standing relationships, where they are resilient against the tests that come in the future is important, because that resilience is what has carried a number of initiatives through this COVID crisis, and it would be a shame to lose the lessons of that in future crises. And I'll hand back to you, Nelson.
Thank you very much, Graham. I said 5 minutes. I think you came in below 5 minutes. So I'm extremely impressed with that. Thank you for being very, very straight down the line. I like the point you raised about, yes, this webinar is giving us an opportunity to reach wider audience within our community. That is quite profound. The issue about investment flow and the FDI, yes, it has gone down, but it's not unique. But the question is, how do we respond to that, which I think is quite critical. And looking at the issue about procurement and government, I think that's also very important. Remote working, something that you haven't touched on, which I'll come back to about. What does this mean in terms of the 5G going forward? And I like the way you conclude, which is really about collaboration. Yes, it's working very well. Can we do more of that in the future? I'm going to invite Daduna at this point to come on. Daduna, she's our head of legal and compliance. You haven't seen her facing in the past, but she's been behind the scene to make sure we have the right agenda on this one. We've had, Vincent talk about the contract. The question I'm going to put to Daduna is very simple. How can FIDIC respond better? To use the word that Vincent talked about is that contract does not exist in vacuum. It is a project management tool to enable both parties to come together. What else, Daduna, do you think we should be doing that we can learn from this process moving forward? Daduna, the floor is yours. 5 minutes. Thank you. Can you unmute, please? Can you unmute?
Thank you, Nelson. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
I welcome participants from Geneva, where the FIDIC Secretariat is based. Just to give a little bit of a summary of the background, FIDIC has produced standard form of contracts that provide for shared and balanced risk allocation, provide for proper and timely communication between the parties, promote dispute avoidance and efficient dispute resolution when the disputes cannot be avoided. FIDIC forms of contracts are used internationally, are adaptable to various jurisdictions. Contracts are drafted by the engineers with a simple language. And as Vincent has mentioned, FIDIC contracts continue to prove that they are a great tool to deal with the issues that arise on the projects and including during the pandemics. Further to standard form contracts, FIDIC has produced guidance documents and best practice documents, and that is to help the understanding of the FIDIC contracts. FIDIC also provides the trainings on the use of the FIDIC documents and provides adjudication appointment services when the parties fail to appoint or compose the dispute boards. All those activities are undertaken by FIDIC to facilitate infrastructure development and successful delivery of the projects. And when this pandemic arose, the questions really were, how is this going to impact the projects, the various industry participants, what does it mean for FIDIC contracts, and what FIDIC could do to support the industry in providing the guidance. In the webinar sessions that FIDIC has provided, we have received enormous amount of questions during the Q&A sessions. Speakers tried to cover most of the questions, but of course it was not possible to address all of them. So when we look at them, we have grouped them in different areas where most of the questions have come to, and I can identify that the most of the questions are impact on the ongoing projects that relate to the interpretation of FIDIC contracts, force majeure clauses, entitlement of the parties, is the contractor entitled to time or money during this COVID pandemics. Record keeping was suggested by most of the speakers, and we received the questions from the audience. Record keeping, but what are the best ways to keep records? How do we meet those requirements? The role of the engineer is under exam. I mean, the questions come, what is the role of the engineer and how the engineer could help? How to work remotely and to maintain health and safety of the participants is also one of the biggest raised question. We also had questions whether there is a need to renegotiate the contracts, and if so, what are the best ways to go forward and how to collaborate in the best possible ways. A lot of questions have been raised on ADR. Some of the questions are tailored and addressed to specific issues that relate to pandemics, but there are a lot of questions that are asked about the simple use of the ADR, and that questions that would arise out of the pandemic as well. For example, is a DAB decision legally binding? Who forms the dispute boards? Who can challenge the decisions? Audience is particularly interested on the impact of COVID-19 on future and planned projects. The questions that arise are, how do we negotiate contracts now when we know that the pandemics is here? When the previous contracts were entered into, pandemics was not here, so everyone is now looking at the force majeure and what it means for the contracts that are already in place. But how do we sign the contracts? How do we tender now when we already know, and this is not going to be a force majeure in terms of an unpredicted, we already know it is there. So how do we enter into new contracts? Looking at those questions, the first answer is that many answers to the questions that we have received through the Q&A can be already found in the documents and guidance in the FIDIC contracts. FIDIC contracts address those areas, and also the guidance documents or the guide documents that FIDIC has produced previously provide answer to many of those questions. As for example, for the users of the 99 suite of contracts, FIDIC has published a guide to the 99 editions, and that already provides very useful guidance on how FIDIC contracts are used and interpreted. Further, to address the immediate needs, as mentioned by Vincent, FIDIC has issued a guidance that captured the various scenarios where the industry participants can find themselves. And looking forward, we're looking at those identified areas already and see what can FIDIC do in future in the webinars, in the guidance documents. Should we issue the supplementary and project
I'm not quite sure whether, we've lost Daduna there, whether she's still with us. Is it just me, or I think I'm going to go across into Andy now and try and bring Andy on board. I'm not quite sure we have technology issue there. Andy, are you ready to go? You've listened to us. You've attended all of this program. You are as good as the president. If I could qualify you in that position, you've listened to all sorts of issues. I see Daduna is back in. Daduna, I take it that you, unfortunately, we couldn't get you. Are you ready to come back in to wrap up, Daduna, please?
Nelson?
Can you come back and wrap up now? I'm going to get Andy in. Yes, okay.
I was when was I lost?
Can you just summarize now, Daduna? Now we're going to get Andy back on now, okay?
Okay, just to mention that looking at the questions and the areas that has raised and the most that we received, we're looking at to issue the guidance documents and to address them in further webinars. And we will be issuing the contract survey that the audience will be receiving to respond more and to give us more ideas and more opinions what FIDIC should be doing. And I think I don't know when I was interrupted because it doesn't show, so I can just summarize with that.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. That's been very good. I think the point you raised is that most of the question, if I can summarize, you go back by setting out the scene that the FIDIC contract document is meant to be fair and balanced document, well used, and that's why it's very popular all over the world. But more importantly, say most of the questions being raised, there are guidance notes, documents published which are in public domain, and people can go to FIDIC to get them. The answers are there. But more important to me are the theme that came through the Q&A session, how you package that, and how we need to go back to make sure we address those issues. And going forward, so we're going to use more of the webinar, the guidance note, and contract survey to make sure at least we address those issues. Now I'm going to bring Andy back into it. Andy, I know you can write faster than you can speak, and you've been through all this webinar, and you are also out there in the domain, knowing exactly what is going on. The word communication keep coming out throughout the whole message. Bill used the same word. I've heard the same issue that come from Vincent. I heard it from, Anthony. I've heard it from everybody about communication. And I can also say that, it's on record that somebody was bold enough among one of our speakers to say, engineers are not the best communicator. We design the best solution in the world. We solve the world problem, but we are not good at communicating. How can we take the lesson learned from here and move on to the next level and make sure our communication, where we package our issue, are well in tune? Andy, the floor is yours for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Nelson. One of the words that's often used about this COVID-19 crisis is unprecedented. And I think arguably it's an overused word, but I'm going to use it again because not only have we seen an unprecedented crisis that's affected all aspects of our lives really around the globe and indeed our businesses, I also think we've seen, I have to say, an unprecedented response as well from our industry. And I think it's entirely right and proper to actually praise FIDIC in the first instance for its unprecedented response. You spoke in the introduction to this webinar about the 9,000 attendees from across the globe. I'll say that again, 9,000 attendees who've attended these webinars, which I think shows the fact that there is a massive interest in what FIDIC is actually doing and in how FIDIC is actually responding to this crisis. And on a practical level, Daduna's just mentioned there, many of the questions that have been raised in the Q&A sessions during these webinars have been answered by not only the people who've taken part in these events themselves, but also in the guidance documents that FIDIC has provided and will provide going forward to the industry. So I think, without getting too self-congratulatory about it, FIDIC should take a massive pat on the back for what it's actually done during the course of this webinar series, because it has been an unprecedented response. But what does it mean to how the industry communicates and interacts going forward? Anthony Barry mentioned earlier on about the role that FIDIC's member associations have played in liaising with national governments around the world. And I think that's been a critical response in making sure the industry has been represented at the highest level. Because in many ways, one of the reasons why in certain areas of the globe that the industry has actually maybe come out of this in a better position than it might otherwise have done so, is because a number of national governments have designated infrastructure and construction to be essential industries. And one of the reasons why that's happened is because of the brilliant lobbying work that's been done by FIDIC member associations. And I think, that is a massive plus and should be applauded, by the industries. But what does this all mean going forward to the way in which our industry communicates on these issues? I think in the first instance, it means that we need to communicate more. I was speaking to the CEO of a global engineering consultancy company yesterday, and he said he is now holding staff meetings of 1,000 people face-to-face on online meeting platforms. I mean, again, that's unprecedented, I think. And he said that it taught him that actually you cannot communicate too much during this current crisis. But I think on the broader issue of what we're actually communicating as an industry, infrastructure is going to change in the future. Governments are going to look at how they plan, execute, fund infrastructure going forward. And I think those governments and those opinion formers would, dare I say it, be stupid if they did not tap into the massive experience and knowledge of consulting engineers around the globe who really, I think, have actually rose up during the course of this current crisis. And I would appeal to any government representatives who are present on this webinar, and we know there are some, because there have been many government representatives who've attended these events, to make sure that they get in touch with their local FIDIC member association, to make sure that they're in dialogue with those FIDIC member associations. Obviously, it goes without saying that those FIDIC member associations should be in dialogue with those, with those governments as well, because going forward, I think infrastructure will have to adapt to the new normal that everyone has spoken about. And I think we are uniquely placed in this industry to bring together all of that global experience to advise and to assist and to help, not just those governments, but societies, ensure that if we ever see, whether it's a COVID crisis or any other crisis, that our infrastructure is up to scratch and capable of being resilient to facing the challenges that we're going to face in the future. We're involved in a fantastic industry here, and an industry that can really provide massive benefits to society. And I think that this crisis, albeit obviously in a bad way, because we should never forget the terrible deaths that we've seen during the course of this pandemic, but we should never forget also that we have within our grasp an industry here that can provide some real enduring solutions to the real challenges that face us as a global society.
Thank you very much, Andy. I expected nothing but exactly there. I expect you to finish in 5 minutes, and I'm not going to try and summarize that because I know you do that eloquently, but I do remember you talk about it is unprecedented. And the word of unprecedented applicable to business, how the world respond, the crisis and FIDIC, and also the industry. But more important, yes, 9,000 people is actually quite important, but actually the Q&A question has been actually insightful for FIDIC. And you talk about the unprecedented response by FIDIC. I suspect we are all in the world of the new norm. And I'd like the point you raised about industry response to the MA, and infrastructure is going to continue to be a big driver for issue. I am mindful that, Barbara is very good, that she's going to open the floor, the channel for Q&A session. But before the Q&A session actually start taking questions from the floor, I suspect most of the questions coming through, we can see them, but I'm actually going to put one question to each individual and actually ask the question, and hopefully after that I come back into the Q&A coming from the floor. I'm going to start off with Vincent. Vincent, you talk eloquently about the way the contract is being written, and it's actually whether it's different jurisdiction and different application in different particular parts of the world, what people means by force majeure or not force majeure. Let's be absolutely upfront. The document produced by CC, brilliant. There are questions coming through, and those questions coming through will enable us to address more other things. Do you intend to revisit that particular document and make sure that at least other issues being raised as the COVID-19 will move from one phase to another phase, go into the next phase? Are we going to have an opportunity for an update of that so that at least we can make sure that that is very much in tune with what is going on in the rest of the world? Vincent?
Yeah, I think it's a good point indeed. That as we are getting more and more feedback from projects and reports on cases, of course, what you rightfully mentioned, Nelson, is that that would definitely call at some point for an update of this guidance note. We did, yes, definitely, and also we intend to produce a similar guidance note for consultancy services agreements, typically for those of you working with the white book. So that's planned to come soon. But yes, ultimately in a few weeks from now, a global update of what we did so far would be very much welcome.
Right, thank you very much. Quick question to Graham. Graham, you talked about the foreign direct investment into infrastructure that has gone down by between 30 to 40%. I just want to pick that up because this is a very, very good signal for investment into emerging country and emerging market. When you go back into the 2008 or 2007 financial meltdown, and then we had a drop in the FDI figure. Now we have similar drop. But again, you look at the stock market has come up again, which is an indication as to people's interest in investing in emerging market, particularly long-term infrastructure investment. What's your take? Do you think that return would be something that would be quick, and what can we do to fasten that return of FDI into countries where infrastructure is very, very below the par? Graham?
I suspect the return will be quick in some areas. So for example, where you've got issues with continuing COVID cases at the moment, you are likely to see FDI investment into areas such as health and housing, and that will probably recover quite quickly. With regards to sort of roads, rail and bigger types of infrastructure, I think it will very much depend on their exit profile and the social distancing rules that come out. The good news is that if the stock market is coming back, and if you do have an overpricing of things like bonds and yields for companies at the moment, it means that as people come out, there should be funds and finance available to shift across those borders. So I think it will probably be a quicker recovery than the last recession, but I still don't think it's going to recover in the next sort of instantly bounce back in the next 12 months.
Thank you. Tony, the question, this one is to you before I pick up. This is not from the floor, this is from Nelson, so be ready for it. Now, you talk about leadership, and I know you are very passionate about leadership, but you distinguish between corporate leadership and situational leadership where you need to respond very quickly. And you talk about the need for culture and the way you build a relationship with your staff. You know, how critical is that? Because we talked about we don't want to go through another COVID-19 or COVID-20. We really would like things to get back to some normality. As company go back from what it is now into the crisis management back in, what is the key message to leaders in terms of looking at their own personality, their own character, the company culture, and how they really need to engage the new world? What's your advice in that area?
I think it's very important that in the first instance, the CEO or the leadership team does the work to understand how people are feeling. And that can be done through a multitude of instruments. There's certainly lots of survey tools around that would help one do that. It's very important to understand how your staff are going, what are their challenges, and what are the things that they are experiencing in this new normal. And from that, to be able to synthesize the way forward. To define it, it's going to take work, it's going to take creative design for people to redefine that. And companies are going to do that in very different ways, and it's going to become a point of competition in the industry between various firms as they work forward with their clients. And some clients will find some consultants more supportive than others. So to me, the leadership situation, we've got through, if you like, the health crisis. We're now starting to, what I'll call, plan the return to work, albeit many people have been working from home. But we are planning a new normal. We are going to create a new design. We're going to make hopefully we're going to put our clients and our staff at the center of that design. And we're going to do it in a way where the staff, our teams, own that new direction. And in some cases, I'm sure it will require some redefinition of corporate strategy. There'll be many things affected, including budgets and all the rest of it. But it is important that from the top, that plan is led, or that planning is led, and that the staff and the clients are given the confidence to go forward with the company. As I said, it's survival of the fittest. It's going to be competitive. And some people are going to do it very much better than others.
Thanks very much, Tony. Chituwa, this is a question from me, not from the floor. And I'm sure that you know the way I operate by now. You touch on the issue about people need to know they can get access to data 24/7. When they go to bed, they can get up. Now, we generally talk about infrastructure, and we talk about hard infrastructure, which is the road, the bridges, and everything. But sometimes we fail to recognize this soft infrastructure, which are critical, as in, technology and bandwidth for people to earn. How do you think, the industry can wake up and advise government on the criticality of this infrastructure, because they are really enabler? What do you think, the suggestion would be for us to move forward on that? Chituwa?
Yes, I think for that one, if we're going to embrace the new normal and require employees to work remotely or from home, definitely the government has to consider making ICT more affordable and more reliable. It just doesn't end at the broadband. It also ends at power shortages. The government also has to consider looking at renewable energy, such that when we have power shortages, work can still continue when we rely on other more reliable sources of energy. So broadband accessibility to to internet, I think is key. We experienced it here in Zambia where we were asked to go and work from home. And then you get home and then one, you can't work because you don't have power. Two, you can't work because you don't have maybe resources to buy data. So then, but then you're expected to do reports. You're expected to go on do Zoom meetings. How do you do that? So already there's a barrier. So government definitely has to look into investing in this technology so that then we can then proceed, or else we'll go nowhere. That's my take on that.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start picking questions from the floor now. Some of these questions are straightforward and I'll try and address them. Some of them require one sentence. So please, my panelists, be gentle with me. I need a very punchy answer to the question. The first one I'm going to pick up actually is directed towards the president. And I think it's from a person called Shampoo, KC. I'm not sure which part of the world. It's a President FIDIC suggestion, make cheaper rate for membership for new entrepreneur. I suspect, Mr. President, the question is, how can we get more people to become FIDIC member? I'm not sure what exactly the answer is going to be. Bill, the question to you.
Well, I wish I knew the answer, but I know you and I have chatted about expanding opportunities for those interested in FIDIC to join us. And we talk about that at the board level, and we're certainly wide open to ideas. FIDIC offers a lot of value to many, many stakeholders in the construction industry and engineering profession. And right now, we're structured with member associations, and we don't see that changing. But we do have opportunities for those who are not directly part of member associations to join us through affiliate membership and that kind of thing. And we're wide open to those ideas, because as we look into the future, there is real potential for us to expand membership, and we need to do it in a structured way. So don't have a direct answer, but we are talking about it.
Thanks very much, Bill. Next question is to Graham. Again, I need a very quick answer from you, Graham. There's a lot of questions coming from the floor here. This is from a guy called Mark Mosley. I think I met you in Singapore a few years back. That's a name that rings familiar. Question to Graham Pontin. Could you please repeat the statistic you provided on the 2 trillion positive economic impact of improvement in global digital connectivity? I think he's waiting for some statistic. Graham, do you have the answer?
Yeah, that's fine. If I remember correctly, I believe it was a World Bank report, and effectively it's if you raise the participation rate for internet connectivity from 35% to 75% across the developing world, it would create 2 trillion in collective GDP and over 140 million jobs. And that, if I remember rightly, that was calculated before COVID, so the effect is probably likely to be even bigger now.
Thank you, Graham. Next question is from Andrea Rico. I'm not quite sure where Andrea is from. This is to anybody within the panel, but I'm actually going to put it across to, I think I put it to Tony. The question goes to anyone, what do FIDIC says about diversification of businesses in the new normal? Will there be many hybrid engineering companies in the future? You know, well, that will be tricky for the next revolution industry, and also FIDIC must find a way to adapt. I suspect this is a question to everybody. Tony, what's your take on the subject?
Yeah, well, I think the world is full of opportunity, and I do think we're going to see different business models. We're going to see some merger and acquisition activity taking place as well, which may involve one distressed partner at least. But I do think we are going to see tremendous upheaval and change take place. And what hybrid means in this context, I'm not sure. But if, for example, we were to see a breakdown in the consulting industry of some serious nature, there's no doubt some of the contractors would need to develop in-house design capability to address the issue. So I do think we'll see a little bit of or many new models come through. As I say, competition is the necessity, or necessity is the mother of invention, and I think people will find their way through it as best they can.
Thank you very much. We now know that we have Uber Eat, Uber Driver, Uber this, Uber that. They all came as a result of the last big recession. So watch out. Next question, I think I'm going to put this across to preferably Vincent, is how FIDIC introducing clearly sharing of risk between contract parties. Is there a ready-made answer for that, Vincent? Can we be more clear in how we risk our share between contract parties?
Well, I think the risk allocation has been well developed over the years, and now we have a robust, clear risk allocation scheme in between the parties. And again, I would refer people to the guidance note that we have put together, because it provides for all the answers to this kind of question, with various relief mechanism which can be explored, and also, if need be, to our training events on contract.
Okay. Vincent, while I've got you on, there's a question here which is on force majeure. I think you've already answered this question, but I'll put it again. This is from Alpha, and the question is, there's been a different thought on the force majeure clauses with regards to the pandemic. One school of thought does not consider this pandemic as force majeure, while the other school of thought does. What will FIDIC do in the future to clear this gray area?
Yeah,
so
it's yeah. As I mentioned before, it's definitely not one case, a force majeure argument. And again, this is me speaking from my civil law background, where we all very well know that a force majeure case is very often an uphill battle in courts. It all very much depends on the facts. So this will depend on the country situation, depending on whether your local government has put a ban on construction activities or not, or what kind of conditions have been imposed by your local governments for construction activities to continue. It's very much fact-based, and it depends on two things: whether you are actually prevented from performing your obligations, and in that case, you can have a force majeure argument, but you need to go through a second hurdle, which is, can you do something to overcome it? And one may argue that if you have the right health and safety measures in place, then you can continue. Okay. Making the contract implementation more onerous is not a reason for force majeure. You would be looking at hardship provisions, and that's something different. So we cannot be more clear than what the factual situation is. And in fact, trying to go for simple answers is taking the risk of going for simplistic views.
Okay, thank you very much. There's a question from the floor here, which I'll very quickly answer that. I wasn't party to this yesterday, but the question goes, post-COVID, each country will have their own new normal. How is FIDIC going to respond in terms of country-specific document? I think the answer to that is very simple. FIDIC has got 102 member associations in different countries. Whilst we can try to provide a global perspective, we expect our member association in each country to address that as best as we can. But I do understand that the future leaders had a webinar yesterday, and Mr. President was there. And one of the items that I believe is coming out of their webinar in future is they are looking at different country, different geography, and they will produce a document that will address how different countries will respond to that. So there is a document coming through. And the next question that I want to pick up again, I think it's from Georgia. Who should take responsibility for the cost caused by delay of contract during the pandemic? What is the best practice? I think this has already been covered before, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I would suggest please go and read through our previous webinar and listen to it on YouTube, and the guidance that give us some thought. At this point, we are now coming towards the end of the Q&A. There's a lot of questions here. As Daduna said, we keep on filtering through there. But what I want to do at this point is really come back into all the panelists and actually give them an opportunity to sum up in terms of what I consider the key message coming through. We understand that we had a healthcare crisis. We move into economic crisis. We're now looking into social crisis. And in between that, we've had the issue about unprecedented message that's come through. And we looked at the impact on corporate from Tony. We look at the issue to do with Bill, looked at the bigger issue, and he gave us those 3 points. And we also hear from yourself, Vincent, on your area of interest. So what I want to do now within the next 2-3 minutes is to ask you one sentence of what should we be doing going forward? This is not going to be the end of the series. What should we be doing going forward? I'm going to start off from Tony. Tony, what's your take, your advice?
I think my advice is to start reimagining the future, to really come to grips with how that future is going to unfold. And to me, that also may mean taking a much more dynamic approach to strategy. And rather than having your plan laid out for the next number of years, is to really start looking at the next 3 months, the next 6 months, the next year, the next 2 years, and recognize that the situation is dynamic, it will change, it may be volatile and uncertain. And I think we have to, as it were, go with the flow and really work with the situation that we're facing. And FIDIC can assist, I think, in facilitating some level of guidance and discussion around that.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go, Vincent, your comment, closing comment?
Yeah, I would say looking forward, the main point that I would like to see in the construction industry is that we keep, of course, having an open view and a 360 degrees view on the way to manage our construction operations. First of all, well knowing your contract terms. I mean, this is really obvious and this is not new, but I think in this kind of situation, it's more and more vivid to be fully aware of your contract terms, to keep, of course, a very close eye on the impact of the law in the country where you operate, and also about social impact of your activity, and also the economic impact of your activity overall, and to keep in mind your long-term objectives, especially if you work with supply chain. If you put your supply chain at ransom by having two adverse contracting practices, this may fire back to you in the long run.
Thank you very much. Can I bring Chituwa in? What's your closing statement, Chituwa?
I, for me, believe industry readiness, industry ready responsiveness, constantly go back to the drawing board. Nothing is written in stone, nothing is cast in stone. Always be ready for change, adopt it, be resilient, as everybody has already mentioned, be agile, and yes, be futuristic and be open-minded. And of course, always keep your ear to the ground and see what is happening in the industry.
Thank you very much. I'm going to bring Daduna. What's your comment, closing comment?
COVID-19, the pandemic, is a challenge for everyone. And I think we should keep collaborating, listening to each other, and thinking and doing everything to adapt to the present and to future. I think this is the way forward. In a normal scenario, we would be sitting in a classroom and speaking to the audience while we engage with everyone, but this COVID has brought us behind the computers that we have to address from this way. So this is one of the ways we're trying to adapt, and we should be taking the same approach for the other areas.
Thank you very much. Thanks, sir. I'm going to go for Graham. Graham, are you still there? If I can still find you. Graham, what's your take?
Yeah, still here. I mean, I would echo that. It's we have this crisis, if anything, has taught us there is one planet, one world, and it's got to be looked after not only for itself but its people. And where we have had things that have come out of this crisis that have been positive in nature, and there is a lot of pressure on international institutions at the moment, we should concentrate on taking that momentum forward for the next 10 years so that it improves the position in future issues and crises.
Thank you very much. Andy?
Yeah, just to finish off on that point that Graham raised, I think is absolutely crucial. A number of the webinars we've held already have mentioned the role of sustainability and the environment. And I think that will be absolutely paramount going forward. We do have one planet. We do need to look after it. And as we move forward, how we engineer a post-COVID future and the challenges that global infrastructure face, I think are subjects that we all need to look at. And hopefully FIDIC might well organise something to discuss those issues, possibly online in the future.
Thank you very much, Andy. Bill, as however, I always try and drag you in. You got us started. What's your closing statement, Bill?
Well, thank you, Nelson. I'm going to just wrap up where I started. I see three major themes that we all talk about at every one of these, and that's one, and they're essential. Leadership, communication, and collaboration. All of those words are easy to say, but within all of them are massive challenges going forward. FIDIC can add value in every one of these, and we need to focus on doing just that.
Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you very much, Bill. At this point in time, normally what I do is to give you the list of what's coming up in the next round, but I'm actually going to change the tack a little bit. We have a few minutes, and since it's the last one at the MC, I'm going to take undue advantage of it. Just to try and put it into context, we've had all sorts of issues happening up in the industry, and sometimes we fail to engage the big issue. I was involved in some interaction recently where we're looking at how the industry has changed. Some of the issues I had was that we need to learn to be nimble. We need to look at how capital allocation is going to impact. Access long-term resilience of industry is going to be critical. We still need to look at the flexibility of our industry and technical adaptability. Big issue in terms of double down better. Is there any issues coming up in future? Increase in technology use will going to be a big issue for us in the future. Increase in investment in infrastructure will be a big issue, and why we need to accelerate, the industry utilization and importance of off-site manufacturing. All of these are going to be issues coming through. Should I finish today and just say thank you very much without making recognition? Absolutely no. I think the question that is going through the back of my mind is we've now done 18 webinars, and you probably ask, where is the next chapter? We haven't sat down without having a solution. We've had the issue about coming out of COVID. Andy mentioned that. We've had comments again. There will be a series of programs to be developed over the coming weeks and months, which we look at, coming out of COVID. What does it mean? We look at that. We've had Bill talking about the State of the World report is going to come up, and there'll be a series of reports coming through in future. We'll be going through that, and all of this, we will develop a webinar series to cover that. And I think Daduna alluded to the point. Yes, do we do this and stop and don't do anymore? Or is this a beginning of new thing? Can we use this webinar and this platform to engage more wider stakeholders across the world? So we'll be looking at the issue of how do we use our State of the World report to engage wider audience. Also, we've now revitalized our committees. We have so many of them coming through, and we've got 10 committees. We hope to use that as a platform to engage. Next slide. If you look at the COVID-19, some of the ideas that we are floating, and whether we cover all this fully, as Bill keep reminding me, flexibility is the key word, and listen to our members, listen to feedback, and using the feedback to make sure we adapt our process is going to be critical. So we're looking at a series of items to cover under the COVID-19 coming out of it. Next slide. It gives us an opportunity. We've had the word of the sustainability development goal. How does that fit into our document that is coming through in future? We'll be looking at where engineers and consulting engineers can impact the industry, and we'll look at all the report that is going to come out, which is now programmed over the next 12 months. Starting from July, there will be a series of documents coming through on infrastructure investment and global risk. Bill always talk about it. How do we use this as an opportunity to engage? Going all the way to showing progress with water project example, that would be a classic example. We go through the whole of that process. We'll be looking at living sustainability, which is a big issue, sustainable community, smart city. We've got about education, infrastructure, and empowering labor capital. We talked about this. It's not going to be those big infrastructure. Education will be a key part of it. We need to look at health infrastructure. We talk about building all these fast hospitals, but what are the other future topics to come through? Bill's comment is be flexible and be agile. We've got 10 new working committees. Our plans over the coming months is to make sure every month we use the webinar as a platform to engage on what our committees are doing, and we'll be encouraging them to have a program for the next 12 months. Next slide. My take on it is without the team, we couldn't have delivered this. And I'm so grateful to say thank you to all the FIDIC staff behind the scene who's been support, from Barbara all to the designer. But more important, thank you to all those who participated, who've been online supporting us since we started 10 weeks ago. And thank you to our panelists who's been here to support us, quite a number of them on the list. And really, I want to close out with the statement by saying, without you, without your support, without your participation, it would have been very difficult to achieve those statistics that Andy talks about, to have 9,000 people supporting us over the last 10 weeks, and to have over 7,000 or 8,000 digital supporting us over the last 10 weeks. It's been absolutely unprecedented, to use that word. So I will go on to say thank you to everybody. Thank you to the participants. Thank you to the panelists. And FIDIC is here to stay. This is the beginning of a new chapter. Thank you very much wherever you are, and keep safe. God bless. Thank you.